I wasn't asleep when it happened. That's the part no one ever expects. People assume that when you get old, night comes easier, that your mind softens and drifts without resistance. But that night, sleep avoided me like it had for months. My body rested, but my thoughts refused to lie down. The house was quiet in that way only deep night can manage. No traffic. No voices. Just the faint ticking of the kitchen clock and the low hum of the refrigerator working harder than it needed to. I was sitting upright in bed, wrapped in a cardigan I should have thrown away years ago, flipping through an old seed catalog. I wasn't planning a garden. I just liked the feeling of pages that didn't glow back at me. That's when I heard it. Not loud. Not sudden. Just wrong. The back door. It made a sound no one else noticed anymore. A soft scrape, followed by a hollow click. My husband used to promise he'd fix it. He never did. I stopped asking after he got sick. That night, that broken door saved me. I froze. I didn't move. I didn't breathe any louder than necessary. I reached over and turned off the lamp beside my bed, letting the room fall into darkness. Footsteps followed. Slow. Familiar. Not rushed. That's when I knew it wasn't a stranger. Strangers rush. Family assumes. I reached for my phone. Not to call anyone. To watch. My granddaughter had installed a security system the year before. She said it was just in case. I remember laughing, telling her I'd lived alone for years without a problem. I opened the app. The hallway camera flickered on. 2 figures appeared on the screen. One of them was my grandson. The other wore pale blue scrubs and carried something small in her hand. A syringe. My heart didn't race. It sank. Not because I was afraid, but because I understood. They weren't there to hurt me. They were there to use me. I watched as they stopped outside my bedroom door. The woman leaned in close to him, whispering. "She's usually asleep by now." He replied quietly, impatiently. "Just do it quickly. We only need one signature." A signature. That word echoed louder than any scream could have. I lay back down, pulling the blanket higher, arranging my breathing into something slow and shallow. I let my mouth fall open slightly, the way people do when they believe no one is watching. The door opened just enough to let them in. I smelled antiseptic before I felt anything else. The woman approached the bed. Her fingers brushed my wrist, checking for movement. "She's out," she whispered. I wanted to laugh. Instead, I stayed still. The needle pressed into my arm. A quick sting. Controlled. Professional. I didn't flinch. Seconds later, they stepped back. My grandson leaned closer. "This'll help you sleep, Grandma." I let my eyes flutter, confused on purpose. "Sleep." I murmured. "Why, what's going on?" He cursed under his breath. "It's nothing. Just rest." Then they were gone. The door closed. The house returned to silence. I waited. 30 seconds. 1 minute. 2. The heaviness came, slow and dull, like a storm forming behind my eyes. But it wasn't enough to take me under. Whatever they gave me, it was measured. Enough to confuse. Not enough to erase. I sat up. My arm tingled, my legs weak, but my mind was clear enough to understand exactly what had just happened. I wasn't sick. I wasn't confused. I was being robbed, politely. I walked into the hallway, steadying myself against the wall, and went straight to the small cabinet where I kept things no one ever bothered to look through anymore. Inside was a flash drive. I plugged it into the router, downloaded the footage, labeled it carefully. 2:07 a.m. Then I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I used to serve pancakes every Sunday, and stared at the screen. The video showed everything. The unlocked door. The whispered planning. The syringe. The words, "We just need her to sign." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I understood something important instead. This wasn't a mistake. It was a plan, one that had been unfolding for a long time. And this time, I had proof. I didn't sleep after that. Not because of fear, but because something inside me had finally aligned. Like a picture snapping into focus after months of blur. By dawn, the heaviness in my body had faded, but the clarity stayed. I made tea and didn't drink it. Just held the mug in both hands like an anchor while the sun rose outside my kitchen window. The street looked the same. Lawns watered themselves. Birds argued over crumbs. The world hadn't noticed anything wrong. That's how these things survive. Quiet. I replayed the footage again. And again. Every whisper. Every pause. Every assumption they made about me being helpless. They weren't panicking. They were confident. That told me everything. People don't take risks like that unless they believe they've already laid the groundwork. So I started looking. Not emotionally. Methodically. I went to the small writing desk in the living room, the one no one touched because it looked outdated and inconvenient. Inside were folders labeled in handwriting I recognized instantly. My late husband's. Insurance. Property records. Old tax returns. Everything exactly where it should be. Except for one thing. A thin folder on the coffee table. Blue. New. Inside it was a document I had never signed, but one that carried my name. A financial authorization form. My signature sat at the bottom. Or something that wanted to be my signature. The loops were wrong. The pressure uneven. Whoever forged it copied the shape, not the movement. They didn't know that my hand always pressed harder on the downstroke. George used to tease me about it. This version didn't breathe. The date printed on the page made my stomach tighten. It was from early spring. When I'd been in the hospital. When people had started helping. That's when the memories lined up. The missing mail. The bills I never saw. The passwords that suddenly didn't work. I had asked questions. I'd been reassured. I'd been managed. I sat down slowly, feeling the weight of something heavier than betrayal. They weren't reacting to my weakness. They were exploiting my trust. The phone rang. I didn't answer it. A message followed minutes later. Hey, just checking on you. You seemed a little confused last night. Confused. That word is dangerous. It plants doubt before anyone even asks a question. I turned the phone face down. By noon, I was dressed and standing at the front window, watching leaves shift in the breeze. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was calculating. There are moments in life when emotion clouds judgment, and moments when judgment sharpens emotion into something useful. This was the second kind. I took the flash drive and slipped it into my coat pocket. Then I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. A lawyer who remembered me not as fragile, but formidable. He didn't ask many questions when I said I needed discretion. He didn't interrupt when I said I'd been drugged in my own home. He just said, "Come now." His office smelled like paper and polish. He watched the footage without blinking, without commentary. When it ended, he leaned back and folded his hands. "This," he said, "is not a misunderstanding." I nodded. "I know." We moved quickly. Accounts frozen. Authorizations revoked. Copies made and secured. He explained something important, something predators rely on. If you isolate someone quietly, you don't need force. You only need time. And they'd been patient. Until they weren't. When I left his office, I didn't feel relieved. I felt awake. On the way home, I stopped at the bank. The same branch I'd used for decades. The manager printed transaction histories that told a story no one had bothered to explain to me. Transfers labeled routine. Withdrawals described as maintenance. Payments to accounts I didn't recognize. Small enough to go unnoticed. Large enough to drain a life. By the time I returned home, the house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a crime scene. That evening, there was a knock at the door. I didn't open it right away. Through the peephole, I saw my son. His posture was relaxed. His face arranged into concern. The same expression he'd used my entire adult life when something needed to be smoothed over. I opened the door just enough to speak. "You should go," I said. He tried to laugh. "Mom, let's talk." "I know about the documents," I said calmly. "And the nurse." His face changed. Not guilt. Fear. That told me the rest. "I've hired counsel," I continued. "Everything is documented." He tried to speak. I closed the door. That night, I organized paperwork until my hands ached. Legal. financial, personal. I didn't cry. I built structure. Because when someone tries to erase you quietly, the most powerful thing you can do is make yourself impossible to ignore. The next morning, I woke before the sun. Not startled. Not afraid. Prepared. There's a difference between reacting and deciding. I had spent too many months reacting, to concern, to kindness that came with strings, to help I hadn't asked for. Now I was deciding. I made breakfast properly for the first time in weeks. Toast. Eggs. A piece of fruit I actually cut instead of letting soften on the counter. I ate slowly, not because I was hungry, but because routines remind you who you are. Afterward, I sat at the table and made a list. Not of what they'd done, I already had that. A list of who still saw me clearly. At the top, I wrote one name. My granddaughter. She had never brought me papers to sign. Never spoken over me. Never corrected my memory. She just listened. I called her from the landline, the old number no one else bothered to remember. Nana, she answered half awake. I need your help today, I said. No questions yet. There was a pause. Okay, she said. Tell me where. We met at the public library. I chose a table near the local records section, old maps, old minutes, old truths that never quite disappear. The kind of place where things wait quietly to be found. She didn't ask why I looked tired. She didn't ask why my hands were steady in a way she hadn't seen before. I handed her the flash drive. Upload this somewhere secure, I said. More than one place. Then send a copy to this email. She nodded, already opening her laptop. As she worked, I watched people move through the library. Teenagers pretending not to study. Retirees reading newspapers they could have read at home. Everyone thinking they were invisible. Everyone wrong. There, she said finally. It's safe. Good, I replied. Now I need you to help me trace something. I showed her the transaction list. Company names that didn't mean anything. Addresses that led nowhere. Patterns that only looked random if you weren't looking closely. Her fingers moved fast. These are shell companies, she said quietly. Most of them. I wasn't surprised. I was vindicated. That evening, my grandson came by unannounced. I saw him through the window, holding a bouquet too bright to be sincere. I didn't invite him in. I just wanted to talk, he said, shifting his weight. Talk about what? I asked. Things got weird, he said, trying to smile. I think there's been some confusion. Confusion again. That word must have come from the same playbook. I know about the injection, I said evenly. I know about the documents. I know about the money. His smile flickered. Not regret. Annoyance. I was trying to help, he said. No, irraplia. You were trying to finish something. I stepped back and closed the door without another word. 2 days later, I went to dinner at their house. I wore something neutral. Nothing dramatic. The goal was to be underestimated. They talked. I listened. They floated ideas. I noted timing. And when the subject of paperwork came up again, casually, like an afterthought, I smiled and said, "Send it to my lawyer." The room went quiet. That's when I knew they still believed I might bend. They were wrong. The confrontation came later. No yelling. No raised voices. Just facts laid gently on the table like fragile glass. 3 days to return everything. 3 days to surrender access. 3 days before the story stopped being private. When they left, I felt no triumph. Only certainty. That night, a note appeared under my door. No signature. No return address. A warning dressed as concern. I documented it. Because fear only works when it stays vague. The next day, the calls began. From people asking questions they weren't supposed to ask yet. From institutions checking competence instead of evidence. From someone leaking a story before realizing who held the receipts. I didn't panic. I made one call. To a woman who knew how to tell the truth publicly without apology. When she asked if I was ready to speak on record, I said yes. Because silence had already cost me enough. The article went live on a Sunday morning. Not flashy. Not cruel. Just precise. It didn't use my photo. It didn't need to. Words were enough. Facts were enough. Timelines don't lie when they're backed by records, footage, and signatures that don't belong to the people claiming them. By noon, the phone rang more times than it had in years. I didn't answer most of them. Concern is noisy when it arrives late. The calls I did take were quiet ones, neighbors asking if I was okay, old colleagues saying they were proud, women I barely remembered thanking me for saying something they'd swallowed for years. One message stood out. A single sentence from an unknown number. "Why would you do this to your own family?" I deleted it. Because the truth is simple. I didn't do anything to them. I stopped protecting what they did to me. That week moved slowly and all at once. Lawyers spoke to lawyers. Accounts corrected themselves. Access disappeared. The nurse came forward. Not out of conscience, out of fear. Fear loosens tongues faster than guilt ever does. She admitted there had been pressure. Promises. Assumptions that no one would question the intentions of concerned family. That word again. Concern. It's the most useful disguise there is. Formal charges followed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. In ink. On paper. In records that don't forget. I didn't attend the first hearing. I didn't need to. My presence wasn't required for the truth to move forward anymore. Instead, I sat in my garden. The roses had dried at the edges. I trimmed them carefully, not to punish the plant, but to let it breathe again. Healthy things need boundaries, too. One afternoon, an envelope arrived. No return address. Inside was a check. The exact amount that had been taken. No note.
No επάλεγη.
Just numbers trying to undo meaning. I placed it in a drawer and didn't look at it again. Money returned doesn't restore trust. It only confirms theft. Days passed. Then weeks. The house felt quieter, not emptier, quieter. There's a difference. One echoes. The other settles. I started walking again. Just around the block at first. Then farther. I took the bus one morning for no reason other than to remember that I could. I stood across the street from the school where I taught for decades. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. I had already left enough of myself there to prove I existed. At home, I began writing. Not statements. Not timelines. Memories. The smell of chalk. My husband burning toast and pretending it was intentional. My granddaughter holding a bird's egg and whispering promises to it. These things were mine. No one had ever had access to them. Another article came out weeks later. Not about crime. About survival. About women who refused to vanish quietly when people decided their lives were easier to manage than respect. My name was there, not as a victim, not as a warning, but as a witness. The final legal call came on a Thursday. "They've signed," my attorney said. "Full restitution. Formal surrender. No further contact." I thanked him and hung up. There was no celebration. Just release. That evening, my granddaughter came over. She didn't ask how I felt. She didn't need to. We sat on the porch as the sun lowered itself behind the trees. "You okay?" she asked eventually. "I am," I said. And for the first time, it wasn't a performance. I wasn't brave. I wasn't heroic. I was simply no longer invisible. And that's what they never expected. They thought I would soften. They thought I would forget. They thought silence was my nature. They were wrong. Silence was something I had been taught. And once I unlearned it, everything changed.